Thank you to the Hunger Project, to the government of the Philippines, and to this movement. I'm going to do three things: reflect a little bit on the broader context, look at what works, as I've been asked to do, and then reflect on what this movement might be able to do. And I say this as ISE is an organisation that looks at the role of the state in citizenship overall, but in our own work we've come to appreciate and focus very much on CDD as platforms, as providing the critical platform for connection between the citizen and state and for delivery. And I think this work is really, it's at the heart of challenges that organizations everywhere are facing. How do you connect the hierarchy with the network? And these platforms, again, provide this critical mesh. As we know, the role of the state is facing new pressures, but also new opportunities everywhere. And sovereignty is not, in our view, just what is recognized by the UN and other countries, or the degree to which it controls territory, but the degree to which the state meets the needs and aspirations of its citizens. And as I think probably everybody in this room knows, citizens are not just passive recipients of services, but need to be rightfully demand to be co-creators of those services. And so the SDG framework itself, other movements like the New Deal are really beginning to recognize this definition of sovereignty and a new definition of citizenship, and a definition of citizenship which reflects but goes beyond what's enshrined in the Universal Declaration, because it's not only the rights of citizenship but the responsibilities and capabilities of citizenship to participate. And I think we're seeing this shift in the definition of the state, and now we need this shift in the understanding and recognition of what development's about. So thank you again to this movement. Why community development-led development? I don't think there's any need to restate it here. The principle of subsidiarity and good common sense demands it. Our own reflection, as we look particularly at community-led development in post-conflict conditions, I might just start with the tale of two projects. And in Afghanistan, post the tragedy of 9/11, there was a mad rush of donors, and I think many of us have seen this rush of donors, very well-meaning, a lot of money made available. And a few months later, a group of villagers asked me to sit down, and they said, "We want to tell you the story of $150 million going up in smoke." And they said, "We'd heard on the radio that $150 million was going to our area, and we were very excited, and we thought this would really transform our neighborhood." And they said, a few months later, "We heard that the project had been finished successfully, but our lives had not transformed." And these villagers became forensic accountants. Now, I don't know, I haven't double-checked their figures, but I have no reason to doubt them. I trust them. But they said, look, $150 million went to a UN agency, and headquarters took 20%. And it was subcontracted to a NGO, and 20% went to headquarters, and so on down the chain. And eventually they said there were some resources left, and this brought wood from a neighboring country, trucked through a shipping cartel, so a fraction of the money came to their villages. And they said, but these wooden beams were too big for the mud walls of the houses we built. So all we could do is chop it up and use it for firewood. And that, they said, is the story of $150 million up in smoke. Now, many, of course, UN agencies do terrific work and are very much needed. But that's the story of one project. The story of the other project was the story of putting the funds in a trust fund and allocating $20,000 on a per capita basis to every village in the community. The block grant made available, and you know how this all works, because it's very similar to PNPM in Indonesia, and programs in the Philippines, RSPN in Pakistan, and now all around the world. But the funding directly to the village chose their own projects, and the infrastructure actually got built. And the instances of corruption were negligible, if any can be found. And a school built under this program costs $20,000, where if it's built through the other system, it costs probably 10 times as much. So these, to us, are the story of the two projects, and the lessons are very urgent to learn. For the broader development community. Now, of course, a big power station may not be built through community development, but for the majority of the public services and the goods that are recognized now by the SDGs, community development is going to be a critical piece of the infrastructure. Finally, then, moving on to a few questions and reflections, and as I said, this work is based on both the design inputs that we've provided, but some comparative lessons looking at PNPM in Indonesia, RSPN in Pakistan, NSP in Afghanistan, programs in Colombia, and many of which have been able to create an impact. I think that, this academic literature is still thinking through to what extent CDD platforms can be helpful in a post-conflict or an active conflict, and it's very complicated and much more academic research needs to be done. But in general, these are the programs. People say, well, it's going to take longer, so we need to do quick impact projects instead. But actually, these programs have been able to move the fastest and be the most responsive. One other short story: when a group of Congress members, senators, and congressmen from the US came out to Afghanistan to visit the project, they said they couldn't quite believe it. They said, but this is how we should do foreign assistance everywhere. So thank you to Cindy for taking the lead on the US government. For those senators said, well, why are we doing it any other way? Then just closing with a few reflections based on some comparative analysis of where the challenges perhaps lie and some questions. I think one is in the question of to what extent is CDD going to be about the distribution of public goods versus a platform for entrepreneurship and revolving funds and micro-enterprise, and how is this community going to fit with the micro-enterprise community? And I think it can in different ways. Certainly in Afghanistan, when the representatives from the communities came together for the National Convention of Communities, they said, why should we spend out our budgets every year? We should just have revolt, we should make this money work for us. But I think that agenda needs to be considered. Of course, there's the question of to what extent is this more effective in rural or urban areas, and what are the differences? I think the enormous questions and potential of what role does technology bring, and now that communities have mostly everywhere access to the mobile phone, mobile money and Bitcoin, what are the implications for even more effective delivery? And then the question is back to what are the question of the linkages between CDD platforms with local government, with national government, with line ministries, and how do we understand the role of government, the role of community, and how these connect together? What function should be performed at which level, and how do they align and how do they link most appropriately? And then moving forward, huge opportunity, and again, thank you for the launch of this movement. How do we, if scaling is the goal, which I think it should be, then how can the CDD mechanisms be appropriately built into government policy at the national level, in cities, in provinces, and local areas? And many governments are already doing that. The Philippines at the forefront of this. And how can other countries learn lessons from you? And then I think also then for the NGO community, how can NGOs build on, share, and pool their knowledge as to what works? Enormous lessons over decades of experience, but how can this be pooled? As John says, these frameworks need to be built out, and how can NGOs be at the forefront of sharing their lessons, but also contributing to creating a common framework and a single window framework that avoids, to the extent possible, replication. Thank you.